Hey, comrades, hope everyone's doing great. We're going to move to the next book in the Dune series, book number 3, which is The Children of Dune. This one focuses heavily on the children of Dune. No, of the twins, Leto and Ganima, along with Aliyah. So literally the children born of the Atreides bloodline in Dune, and their shenanigans. Which sets up for some like real crazy sci-fi bullshit in the following trilogy. I don't think that's really like a trilogy. Trilogy is like a group of books that are kind of all related and they kind of wrap up in my head. This is more of a whatever hexology or whatever, 6 books that deal with like the universe as related to the things set into motion by Paul Atreides, or really like it's Paul, all right, but it's really like stuff that's been like set up by multiple different people that kind of like came to head, and then the things that those who like found themselves in the seat of fate, kind of grasping for the future. There's a podcast, by the way, I don't remember what it's called. If you get on Spotify and look up like Dune podcast, it's these 2 hipsters. They do a great job of breaking all this stuff down. I think they even have like a book club where they read like 50 pages at a time and like go into like in-depth length and talk about stuff out of like the encyclopedia, which is like a gold mine for Dune lore. I recommend, if you listen to these videos that I do, they just kind of like touch on the story and kind of just give you like the plot synopsis and talk a little bit about what's going on underneath, or just kind of like some of my musings or whatnot, that they go into like a much deeper dive. Again, I can't remember what it's called, but they have one for like The Witcher as well, which was not as good because it was based on the Witcher TV series, which is not good, and got worse as time went on. So, but anyway, I haven't listened to them in a while. I'm sure it's sitting around somewhere. They might still be doing it for other stuff or whatever. But anyway, so Children of Dune begins with Stilgar he's hanging out in the sea edge doing his like thing, guarding the twins and whatnot. The twins are sleeping. Stilgar's checking out, making sure they're safe. We're at Siege Tabor. We spent a lot of time here at Siege Tabor. That's the one, that's Stilgar's like siege. So even with like the rise of the Empire and all this stuff, Stilgar still maintains like he's like the bearer of the dead or something. I can't remember exactly what they call the leader of the sieges, but he's still here doing his thing. He's still married to Hera, and he's got like his other wives because polygamy and such, because the Fremen are based as fuck. Anyway, he thinks about the dream of the Fremen, how things have changed because of the Wadib. He thinks about how water is starting to become so commonplace, and that there was even a Fremen that died in a flood. He's like, what the fuck? He thinks about how Jessica is returning to see her grandchildren, but that there's a lot of other stuff going on. He thinks about Kynes, his brother-in-law, who died in the first book, the father of Chani, who's the mother of these children. At some point, he considers killing these children. Because it's like the Fremen way. And they represent like this change, this reliance on water, this lack of like the old ways and stuff. This book deals a lot with like the old ways. Both these twins were born with like a full genetic memory, and they participate in all aspects of life. So they're just like Aliyah, and there's concerns about them being abominations, kind of like Aliyah is. He thinks about the government, the interference of the Bene Gesserit, and what he should do. But at the end of the day, he decides he's going to be loyal to family, which is like these children are like his great nephews, and great nephew and niece. Later on, the children's awake. They're preparing for their visit with Jessica. They chit-chat with Hera a bit about this and that. And then when they're on their own, they discuss Aliyah, how she's getting more and more crazy, and she's really sinking into this abomination thing. We get some more clarification in this book about this abomination system or issue. It was arisen in the previous book. There was a lot of concerns about it. What it really comes down to, it doesn't get to it here, but just for the sake of your information, it just makes a lot more things more clear about why people are so concerned, is that so the people born with like all these genetic memories, so essentially Bene Gesserits who become Reverend Mothers because they take like the spice or whatever, and this is the thing among the Fremen too. We find out later Stilgar brings it up as well as someone like questions him about Aliyah, and he's like, you don't think we know how to deal with abominations? Like, we've been doing this for thousands of years. Don't question us, essentially. But when because of the genetic memories, you have all these like lives that are kind of built into the system, and so when a Reverend Mother takes it on, it's obviously they've been well trained, life's been, they've been doing all this stuff, they like know what they're doing, and so they tend to be able to have like firm control over these like past lives. But when like a child, right, so like your ego is not fully formed as like a child, so you're born with like all these genetic memories, and you're trying to like form your own ego, your own system, and you have all these competing experiences in your head that there tends to be an overtake, and so then these prior lives tend to like force themselves out upon the world, and that can cause a lot of problems, and it causes like the individual, the abomination, to become like not themselves because they don't have enough ego strength, and it can take a while to rise up, but it's because they're constantly fighting against like all these other people, these for dominance over the system, that it's like inevitable that eventually they will just like succumb to like, and not even like positive forces, like they always succumb to like a malignant force, which leads to their complete destruction, and it can cause a lot of like not like magic bullshit explosion kind of stuff, but like a lot of problems like with how they experience and like interact with other people. And so they usually just like put them the fuck down because no one's like figured out a way to like deal with it yet. So there are concerns about Leto and Ganima becoming abominations. You're not like born an abomination. It's just like it's an abomination because eventually that's like the term for what you eventually become. But Aaliyah has clearly become an abomination. And they talk about how it's probably because of the spice trance. And so there's a lot of reticence for them to like inject themselves with like the spice of life, which is the thing they get from like the dead worm, so that they can fully understand and have connection with their previous existences. And like, and it helps with like prescience and all that stuff. But like, as we know from the previous book, Aaliyah's been hitting that spice pretty fucking hard. And it's kind of hard to avoid here on Dune because everything's got like spice laced into it, right? And then they have these like spice orgies, which is where everyone kind of takes a little bit of that spice of life. And we got a scene of that from the first book. And if you remember, like Chani was like, I'm bleeding into like some of your prescience. And that's because of this spice orgies, like the spice of life or the spice of death or whatever whatever they fucking call it. Anyway, okay, so at some point, they're walking around. They find Aaliyah. She's super fucking nervous about Jessica returning. They have a discussion about this. Aaliyah warns them against Jessica. She can't be trusted. She's returned to the Bene Gesserit sisterhood, and then she like takes off to continue preparations. And then Leto and Ganima are like, yeah, she's totally fucking losing it. You got to be careful with that one. And they're like, yeah, hell no spice trance, none of that bullshit. And they're gonna wait till they have like more fixed personalities before they engage with any of that stuff. And then they bring up this heretic in the desert, this prophet, and how it's probably Paul. Later on, Aaliyah is considering all these many things. Why is Jessica come in? And then how she really wants to force the spice trance on Leto specifically to gain some like control over him or something. And then you know, a lot of this. A lot of what we learn in this book, a lot of like kind of the lore, like interactions with characters and stuff, it continues like the tradition of Dune, where like Dune is like the most like sensible, straightforward of the books. In Dune Messiah, we get a lot of like people commenting on things that have already occurred or referencing relationships, and then you kind of put two and two together. And sometimes we get multiple people talking about like the same situation. So we get like different angles and it's really good because Dune comes across as it's like really the world and the existence, especially in the first book, is like so predominant, but as we continue on with these books, it becomes much more character focused, and a lot of what is being developed isn't even like the plot is not as relevant, in my opinion, as like or engaging for me at least, as just like the development of the characters and how they all have unique voices within the story and how they all have their things that they're doing. And so a lot of the like plot, if you will, just kind of gets like, oh yeah, these people got captured off screen, doesn't matter. What matters is like what this person thinks about it, because that tells us about that person and how their interactions with other people and their relationships. And it's just so excellently written, and it's I feel like it's very unique in terms of, I'm not like a super science fiction guy, to be completely honest. In fact, the reason I like Dune partially is because it's more like medieval fantasy, like low fantasy, than anything else. It's more like reading like Conan the Barbarian, like you get like kind of the same vibe, even though it's got like space shit in it. It's not like wackadoo Star Wars space, right? So I really enjoy like the character developments and how they interact and how they change over time and how they realize things and just like experiencing their individual journeys and such. And sometimes experiencing their journeys through the experiences other people are having towards them, or like the feelings they have towards them. And I feel really connected and really like I understand a lot of these characters and like why they're doing the things they're doing because of their interactions, but also because of commentary and from other people. Okay, so the reason I bring that up is because we learned that Gurney is in like a semi-romantic relationship with Jessica. It seems like mostly sexual, but also he's like very subservient. So he's like a eunuch almost in that regard, where he's like serves her directly as like her right hand, but also they're fucking because they both like to fuck. And so let's see that. Okay, so then we head over to Seleucus Secundus, which is the Sardaukar homeworld, and we're watching some like laser tigers. which I don't know why they're called laser tigers. It's never fully explained. They're just like very intense tigers. And they're watching these redheaded twins because that's something I don't know if I brought up, but you can see from some of the IEI pictures I generate for these videos, if you watch those, that Paul and his, like Chani was redheaded, and her like descendants, like the twins are redheaded. Aaliyah's got red hair. The redhead thing is a very predominant gene function in these characters. Even Jessica is like, she's got like strawberry blonde hair. Like it seems like not auburn. It's like blonde-ish, but it's like more, it's like reddish blonde. And Leto had like dark hair, right? So then Paul got more of that, but then like his kids and like Aaliyah and stuff got more of like that kind of like red-haired gene situation going on. Okay. So that's important because there's redheaded twins, and these tigers go and they kick they eat the shit out of them, and then someone's like watching, and they're like, "Oh, good, this is good training for them to like hunt down and kill the twins." And it's like, "Oh yeah, the twins, obviously Leto and Ganima. That's what they're trying to get." And then this guy who's like training the tigers and like his Sardaukar like leader are talking about how they're gonna put the prince on the throne, and how the princess is very excited about that. Back over to Dune, Jessica lands with her like retinue. And as she lands, she considers the death of Leto her husband, or her man. She's observing the crowd and notices that Aaliyah begins to approach. Everyone kind of parts, and she makes note about the faithful and about those who seem like less faithful. She's doing like Bene Gesserit witch magic, trying to figure out things. And that she recognizes immediately that Aaliyah has fallen into like forbidden ways, that abomination is like occurring and right before her eyes. At some point, she raises her hand, and then Gurney runs out, and him and his like crew, along with some of Stilgar's men, they kill the shit out of a bunch of like rebels who were like in the crowd, and they were like putting a danger to the life of Jessica. And this is an action we find out that Jessica had planned with Stilgar like way in advance of her coming, but Aaliyah didn't know about it, and Aaliyah gets like super pissed off about it. So they start fighting immediately, and they're clearly not gonna be friends. Erlad shows up. Erlad continues to be like the dumbass that Moheim pointed out before, where she just like wants everyone to get along and like be pleasant, and like and she's taken over the motherly role for Ganima and Leto, and this gets really hammered in a little bit later on, how she's literally their mother because they don't have a mother. I mean, they have like memories of Chani because they both have like ancestral memory, but the person who's like really taking care of them and making sure they're getting hugs at night and stuff is Erdolan. So Erdolan's, and she emphasizes later on also that she truly loved Paul, and she just didn't realize it at the time, and that her love is now directed towards his children and making sure that they're safe and well, and we even get some of that. We get some of that back from Ganima, who thinks about how she doesn't like say she loves Erdolan as well, but she like prays at some point that Erdolan, no matter what happens to and like all the schemes and Game of Thrones shit that goes on in this book, that she'll be fine, that she'll be okay. Let's see. All right, so then Jessica like meets with some priests. She picks out like a priest to like fuck with Aaliyah. Oh my goodness! And then there's like a ceremony they need to do before she heads off to meet with the twins. And so they head off to do that. Back over at Siege Tabor, Leto is playing the balisette and thinking. His sister walks up. She's super concerned. She's like, "Hey, you doing okay? Are you losing it?" And he's like, "No." And they start talking about like the past memories and all this stuff. They're talking about the worms and the sand trouts. So sand trouts is a new concept introduced here. It's like, so the sand trouts are like the pre-evolutionary state of the worms. So what happens is the sand trouts on Dune, they like started. Sand trouts love water, so they go to where water's at, and so they like suck up all the water, and as they sucked up all the water and went to places where they could continue to suck up water like under the earth, they created this like underground barrier to like all the water. And because they created that barrier, some of them like had to evolve because they couldn't get water, and so they transformed into like the sandworms, like, or not, they didn't transform, they evolved into the sandworms. And so because the sand trout still exists like under earth, they come up and find like other sources of water, but because of that evolution, that's why these sandworms exist, and that's why we have spice, and that's why people are like allowed, essentially, without computers, to travel through space, which makes the empire what it is, and continues to propagate like information and everything else that is necessary for like this interstellar like combine. Something releasing water. So, okay. Then him and Ganima are talking about how like it seems like the worms are starting to die off, and that they're soon going to die off because there's so much water in Arrakis now, and they're being like restrained to like smaller and smaller deserts. And once the worms are gone, all the spice will be gone. And that they also talk about that like Aaliyah knows about this, but she's not doing anything about it. In fact, it seems like she's making it worse. And that they need to figure out a way to let the Fremen know, like Stilgar, but will he listen? He probably won't. He's like so old and stuck in his own ways and whatnot, but you know, they're going to try. Then we had one of the things I don't like about this book is the thing I don't like about a lot of books is that I like all the different characters and stuff, but it's like there's so much bouncing around. The nice thing is none of the chapters are that long, and when they're long, you're getting like it's with like Leto, who's or Ganima, who are like the main characters, and so then it's very important because they're the ones who are like constructing like the reality around them, and are they kind of the main focus as the Children of Dune. I think there's a long chapter with Aaliyah in it as well, and again they're like the main characters, so that's fine. I like that it doesn't have like a super long chapter that's just like Gurney doing shit, because he's really not that important in the grand scheme of things, right? But still, I'd rather just stick with like somebody and do their stuff. It's like I enjoy all the characters in this, so it's like it's hard to complain because this book is so excellently written and so well, and the characters are so good and it's so enjoyable, and all this stuff is super badass and shit. But at the same time, it's like just my predilection. This is not for anybody. I'm not saying this is a bad way to do things. It's just like I kind of get bothered sometimes when it's like I got to keep bouncing around between characters. But the way Frank Herbert does it, as I mentioned before, is how like you bounce to another character, but they kind of what they're talking about is a direct lead on from the previous thing. It's not like I hate Game of Thrones. That book is so bad. Like if you like it, fair enough. You don't like good fiction, as far as I'm concerned. To be completely honest, like I read that first book, it was so boring, and like stuff just like bounce around, and like stuff doesn't really tie back to each other, and I just think George R. R. Martin is like super overrated as like a writer, to be honest. Like when you're reading like Wheel of Time by God, what was that guy's fucking name? Whatever, something Roberts, I think, and like you bounce around to different viewpoints, it's like at least the characters are interesting and the story flows forward and everything makes sense and like things lead into other things. But with Game of Thrones, at least the first book, because I was like refused to read anymore, it was just like, oh, now we're talking about this totally different fucking thing. Awesome. This is so boring. Like I don't care about these characters, and they're all detestable. Every character in this book, even the ones that are like quote unquote the bad guys, have like interesting characteristics and interesting things and motivations and stuff going on. All right, anyway. I hope that is the last time I'll bring that up in this, because again, it's like there's virtually nothing to like badmouth about this series. It's so good. Anyway, okay. So Jessica and Gurney are talking about the whole situation where they're leading on from the previous thing about how the priesthood of Aaliyah has become very stale, and how they are no longer like they just like are existing to self-perpetuate. It's commentary by Frank Herbert, obviously, about religions and about old priest groups like the Catholics and such. I think specifically the Catholics, because he's not like an Eastern Orthodox kind of guy. She then talks about the crowd and the people that were trying to kill her and stuff. And Gurney's like, hey, you gotta be really careful. And just goes, it's fine, we're gonna leave soon, we're gonna head to Tabor pretty quickly. At that point, we finally meet this preacher guy that was mentioned all the way back in chapter 2. Who's this guy from the desert. He is completely blind. He gets led around by this boy. It reminds people of Paul. People call him like, is he the Wadib? He walks without sight, and he says things and whatnot. And the first time he arrived at Leah's temple, he came, he saw the decadence, he told everyone to shut up with like the voice, the power of the voice. And then he talks about the Wadib and how they're disobeying the wants of the Wadib and all that stuff. And then he like takes off, and that's when people start chanting his name. And then at some point he pulls out just like a hand he has, not his hand, like he has like a hand. He's like, this is the hand of God, and I am not the Wadib, I am the preacher. Anyway, back over to Lisa Secundus with our tiger friends. At first I thought it was Erdogan's sister. They call her the princess, and she's got a son, and he's supposed to take over the throne from Saddam IV, who's the emperor who's now dead. But no, this princess is Saddam's sister, and so this kid Faridun is he is the nephew of Saddam, so he's the cousin of Erdogan, but he's like the next, for House Carino, who's the previous empire, now the rulers of Seleucus Secundus, he is like the next in line. Anyway, so we don't meet Faridun yet, but the princess, this is where we learn that the father's dead, his son's kind of weak, he just likes to read books and be a historian and stuff, and that she's setting up this whole thing with this guy or Jarut, about getting tigers and getting the tigers over to Dune to kill the twins and killing everybody who might have any relation to anything, to know anything about what's going on. And she does all this prep and kills all these people, and we find out later it was all for naught because Bene Gesserits figured out it was her like immediately. And she also wants Jarut, this Sardaukar leader, to become a Fremen, the religion of the Fremen, and then work on converting her son to that religion, because then they can try to marry her off over to like the Aliyah, specifically at this point, or Ganima, so that they can like take over, or they can cause like an assassination over there, and then he can like ride in with the Sardaukar and like put order into place and stuff. Now there's no heirs over there, so, it's a lot of plotting with that. Headed back over to Siege Tabor, Jessica is finally meeting with Ganima, and they talk about myth. They talk about the myth of Paul Atreides, of Wadib. They talk about what's going on with their stuff and like seeing past lives and all this stuff. And then words spread about Jessica taking care of people trying to kill her. They talk about Leto and Aliyah. They talk about the Gom Jabor. And then Ganima mentions that not only does she have all like Chani and like the female memories, like the Reverend Mother, she has all memories. So her and Leto have all of Paul's memories. So Leto and Ganima are essentially like, they're almost like the same person because they have the exact same memories and genetic memories, and they're twins. So they're spending all their time together and stuff. And then Jessica considers like she might need to separate Leto from Ganima and then train Leto in the Bene Gesserit ways, just like she did with Paul. Unbeknownst to her, like she doesn't recognize that if they both have all the matriarchal and patriarchal memories from everybody, that includes Jessica. So Leto and Ganima don't need any fucking training to be Bene Gesserits because they have all the training that Jessica had when she gave birth to Paul. Right, and so maybe she has some more now, so maybe a little bit, but they can do everything already. They can pull on those genetic memories and do all that stuff. Heading back over to Arrakeen, the capital of Dune, Aaliyah's in her garden, and she's really fucking losing it. She's pushing hard to fight against people. She's battling. She's struggling. And then all of a sudden, an unexpected ally shows up. Dun, dun, dun. It's Baron Harkonnen. Yes. So they discuss this judgment she made about somebody recently, and he was like, oh, it's very good. And he's like, I'm going to help you, and you can trust me. And she's like, I can't trust you. I can't trust any of you. And he's like, no, you can trust me, because the second they find out you're an abomination and that these other people are taking over, they're going to kill you. But if it's like Jessica who takes over, or somebody else, they can pretend to be you. No one's gonna fucking confuse me being in charge for you. And Elia's like, that's a fair point. And he's like, I can help suppress the others, and then we can gain power and work together, but I want you to have sex with more men, like that guy over there. And she's like, what about my husband, Duncan Idaho? And then one of them makes a comment, I can't remember who, about him not being able to like fulfill his like marital duties in that regard, or something, and or like his penis doesn't work that well because of the Zenzuni thing or whatever, and she has a lot of lusts, and the Baron has a lot of lusts, and thankfully the Baron is into dudes and Aaliyah is into dudes, so like high fives all around. Some mysterious place far away, we get this old man talking to his son about capturing desert people, and this is like Fremen who are keeping to the younger ways, and how like they killed these people and took their water, but they should not tell the preacher. So this chapter seems kind of like throwaway-ish, but it gives us information that's important. That is, the preacher is not just like wandering in the desert like some mystical being, that he belongs to like a siege, and then he has like this group of people who have things that they're doing and that are very tied into the old ways, and that there might be some connection to other things going on. So that's a good thing to know. Anyway, so we go back to the twins. They do this thing every once in a while. They just go out and like train their minds or their bodies, and a lot of their training their minds is to like not become abominations. And then they have come up with a plan to save humanity, and this is the Golden Path. And Paul had mentioned the Golden Path in the previous book like a couple times. So it's like, what is this Golden Path? Oh, we're going to find out. Not even fully in this book, but we're getting a lot more hits about it, but in the books that come. Anyway, they discuss how they need help from their memories, they need help from their ancestors, but they're not going to use spice because of the abomination scare. And this is where we learn the first kind of like, what does abomination actually mean? It means you're being possessed by previous memories, and it's like too dangerous. So there has to be another way. So they call in. So Leto becomes Paul, and Ganima becomes Chani, and they consult with each other, and then they get warnings about power-hungry ideas or people inside them, like Baron Harkonnen with Aliyah. And they know about all that. And then at some point, Paul's like, all right, time to go. And then Chani's like, I don't want to leave. I want to live. And so then Leto and Paul have to like really work hard to get Chani to leave. And part of the reason the Chani memory doesn't want to leave is because she's not as keyed in as Paul. Like Paul was dealing with all this stuff and the genetic memories in the past and all this stuff, and then he could see the future. So all that memory stuff like comes with Paul. So like he is much more like situated as like a genetic memory to be protective of his children because he understands a lot more. Anyway, Leto and Paul, they talk. You know, they talk about they get Chani to finally convince her to leave, and then once she does, Chani becomes like the main protective memory to her daughter. So then that gives Anima like a lot of control over like becoming an abomination, because Chani is kind of always working in the background from that point forward to like push other voices out of the way to protect her daughter, because she's like accepted like the fate and the role of like the existence of her memory, of her being a memory inside her daughter. And so that's good news. We also, it gets hinted at here that women are weaker to becoming abominations than men, because it just like, I don't know, there's no full explanation, but it's just like there's something about genetically women that makes them more liable to allow like the possession or to be overcome by the possession of these inner memories and stuff. And then they start talking. They argue a bit about Leto's dream, about the golden path and whatnot, what needs to be done. And then they talk about different pathways they could take. One of them is that they mate and bear children, and Ganima's like, I really don't want to do that. And he's like, yeah, I don't think that's necessary, but we just want to discuss all possibilities. And then they talk about how they decide they're not going to share the ideas of the golden path with Jessica, not yet, because she's back with the sisterhood. They can't do it with Aaliyah. She's completely lost. And they talk about killing Aaliyah because of her corrupted religion and everything. And they, you know, scheme and plan some more before heading back to their rooms. At this point, we finally meet Faradin. We're back in Seleucus Secundus. He's the prince, the crown prince, or like the leader or whatever. He's talking to Jack about the new religion, about taking over all this stuff, about the Fremen, about killing the twins. He does not like this idea about killing the twins. He doesn't like the tiger thing. He's not a fan of this. In fact, he doesn't really want to take control at all. Like, he'll do it because he has the blood of nobility in his system or whatever, and he's like been raised to be like a king or an emperor. But at the same time, he just wants to like read his fucking books and be left the fuck alone. At that point, Jack brings the preacher over. Hey, they brought him all the way from fucking from Dune, right? They went over there and got him and brought him back over. And so he's wearing this crazy Talaxu mask for some reason. He doesn't wear it anywhere else, but here it lets him see, even though he doesn't have eyes anymore. And I guess that's important or something for some reason, even though it's not super important. But I guess that his attendant didn't come with him, so that helps with that. And he's here because Faradin's been having these dreams, and he wants an interpretation. So then he tells the dreams, and Faradin tells him his dreams, and then the preacher's like, sounds good. And he's like, are you going to interpret him? He's like, I have already interpreted them. And he's like, so what's the interpretation? And he's like, I never said I would tell you the interpretation. Faradin's like, kill this motherfucker. and he doesn't. He thinks that. He's like, I'm going to kill this goddamn old man. The preacher then is like, you're too immature, you can't handle it, you'll get the wrong opinion, so just don't worry about it. Anyway, he calls him out on the assassination plot. He says it's going to fail because of the pride of House Carino. And then they kind of argue some more. Faradin gets like more mad, and then he's like, you're going to stay here, I'm going to take care of you, blah blah blah. And the preacher's like, hell no, I'm going to head back to Dune. And he's like, why would we let you do that? And he's like, I'm going to give you Duncan, Idaho. And he's like, what? How? And he's like, I'm going to tell him something, he's going to come, I promise. I have complete control over him. And so then Faradin's like, all right, like, you got me curious about this whole thing. Let's do it. Let's see what happens. And so he's like, all right, take the preacher back. Fuck. Then he like thinks about this whole thing. And he's like, I'm so tired of all this crazy bullshit. So we continue onward with Leto having a meeting with Jessica. He's explaining to her that Aaliyah is going to abduct her and that she should let it happen. They go back and forth. She thinks to herself, Jessica thinks that she's scared of Leto, but she's also somewhat aroused. Because he reminds her of her Leto. And at some point he calls her out on everything, on the Harkonnen thing, the Bene Gesserits, abandoning Paul and Aaliyah to go back to their homeworld. He mentions there's a path to eternal life, but it's not a Bene Gesserit one, it's a true one. Because the Bene Gesserits still age, well, there is a way to live forever. A new life, and it's going to be in him. The difference between him and Aaliyah is the spice. And part of it is the acceptance that him and Ganima have to their past lives, instead of constantly fighting with the inner voices. They accept them as part of themselves. And then he mentions that Paul's still alive. Like, where's his body if it's not? Jessica's stunned by all this. And later on, while he's heading back to his place, Ganima shows up because Ganima was distracting Aaliyah this whole time, and he mentions that she was successful. Aaliyah's now standing around at their temple. She's watching the preacher preach, and she's thinking about Jessica, about Erdogan, about these clothes that came from the twins. And these clothes are clothes that were used on the twins that were being that were training the tigers. And so, as like a peace offering gift, the House Corino sent them over for Leto and Ganima to wear. And Erdogan's like, it's fine. We checked them out. They seem all good, but Aaliyah's still kind of skeptical about the whole thing. And then Aaliyah is thinking, like, I might need to get rid of Erdogan. She's kind of a dumbass. And the preacher starts literally talking about it right then. And Aaliyah's like, what the fuck? How? And then at this point, she's like, he needs to be dealt with. Especially because he's talking to Duncan as well. And inside her head, she's strategizing with the Baron about all these people that need to be dealt with, about the order, about the remaining, that no matter what, she must maintain power. A little bit later on, Leto is out at the desert with Stilgar. They speak about a lot of stuff. They speak about the change, how the Fremen are becoming weak. He mentions that there's 3 paths forwards. One is where they kill Jessica, one is where he breeds with his sister, and one is where they have to destroy the godhood of Paul, the Wadib. And he's like, that's the one I'm going to choose. They argue back and forth about this. Not that Stilgar disagrees, but that, he's like old-timey guy and he doesn't want to do anything to hurt his friend or his family. Leto then talks about his eternal nature and about how the Fremen need to return to their old ways and cut it with all this like water bullshit. He then recalls 2 incidents from Stilgar's past to make a point to him that he has this eternal knowledge and that he's much older than he actually is. And then Leto also makes some like side comment about how beautiful the Fremen girls are this year. Stilgar's thinking about this later and he's like, Fremen girls are more beautiful. And that's into that. Anyway, but I think it's to tie into like they're water rich. They have like, they can take care of themselves. There's no more of this like lean hardiness or whatever. And it's like this weakness and that, they're making homes with bricks. And he's like, brick making. What about all this is wasted water? And he also, and he considers like everything about Paul, about the future of the Fremen, and about these changes that Leto wants to make. Back over to Aaliyah, her and Duncan Idaho are hanging out. And Duncan is like, there is something definitely amiss with this. He can sense that something is there, like the Baron is there, that she is not actually who she says she is at this point, that she's definitely becoming an abomination, and that she's trying to hide it. Aaliyah essentially is like, hey, I need you to go abduct Jessica and take her out of here. And that secretly, Duncan knows that like she doesn't want Jessica abducted, she wants Jessica dead, because the Baron wants her dead. And this makes Duncan like really sad because deep down inside, well, not even deep inside, he loves Aaliyah. That's why they got married. That's what it is. But she's starting to not become Aaliyah anymore. She's starting to become something alien. But regardless, he goes and performs his duties. Stilgar's still thinking. Go back to Siege Tabor. Stilgar's still thinking about the conversation with Leto, and how Leto was trying to get him to understand how he views life. We then head over to Jessica, who's within the siege, and she's speaking to Ganima. And Ganima is comforting Jessica in terms of her interaction with Leto, justifying the things that Leto was talking about and kind of helping her try to get through that. And then Jessica at this point finally realizes that the twins are much more than they initially appear. A bit later, Duncan, Aaliyah, and Erdogan are all in council because something is up. They need to prepare. We find out there's several lower houses gaining strength, and that this is going to cause problems in the Lancelot because with these more houses, they're going to have more sway, more chome stocks, and that's going to give them more power to kind of affect things that are going on Dune with the ruling house of Atreides. And that there is rumors that they're trying to produce spice, that they're trying to collect worms, take them to other planets so they can get spice there. Meanwhile, they're trying to destroy spice stuff here. Maybe some other stuff as well. And Duncan continues to be like, something is definitely possessing Aaliyah, but he doesn't have any proof. But he knows deep in his mentat heart. He's doing mentat calculations for there now. Aaliyah and Erlon prattle on some more, and through his mentat logic stuff that he's doing, his mentat magic, his mind magic, he realizes that how they're going to the twins are going to be, this whole time he's suspecting that something's going to happen to twins, and he realizes that it has to be a large animal with claws. But he feels like he can't tell Aaliyah because she's convinced that this attack that's going to come, they all kind of are like, there's something going to come, and that assassination attempt, but Aaliyah believes it's her. So he realizes through his mentat magic that she's not going to believe. But And he tries and tries to figure out a way to tell her, but he realizes it's all futile and that she's not going to believe him. And again, he just kind of reiterizes like how crazy Aaliyah is and how things are really getting worse and worse, and that he's like he feels like her dying as a martyr is much better than being discredited. So at this juncture, he finally heads to Siege Tabor to abduct Jessica and to maybe talk to Stilgar about like additional protections for the twins, or at least keeping them away from Aaliyah. Jessica is later on. Jessica's dressed up as a Fremen Reverend Mother as she's awaiting Aaliyah for this like council meeting they're going to have, and she's thinking about Arrakis, how it's changed, how she should have been here to help, how Aaliyah's changed, about her lover, Gurney Halleck, and about Aaliyah's lover, this like priest, and she's just like, there's too much wasted water here. She also considers this letter that Duncan Idaho sent her something about the look of evil coming from Aaliyah. And at that point, Aaliyah arrives and there's like a battle of wits. And this is like a big council meeting where Aaliyah is testing Jessica. They're like talking about, they're both in kind of positions of power within the hierarchy of the government and the church and like being Atreides and all this stuff. And Jessica's starting to confirm all this stuff. And then right in the middle of this like council where they're like passing judgment on people and declaring things, and Aaliyah's like turning it over to Jessica to see what she's going to say, there's like this crazy assassination attempt. Jessica's saved, and the assassin is killed. And then Jessica's like, it would have been better if we'd not killed them, because then we could have like figured out what's going on with all that. And Jessica was saved by this Fremen, one of these Fremen from like the outer reaches that was trying to they like his whole siege like pulled together resources so they could come see Lady Jessica and tell her about the concerns they have with like what's going on. During this kind of like failed assassination attempt, Jessica finally like calls out Aaliyah and mentioning that the Baron is in control and that she is becoming an abomination, and then she makes calculations about the best route out of this like council chamber so that she can survive, because there's like other assassins within the like crowd of people. And so she grabs the Fremen who like saved her and kind of heads out of there after like realizing that Aaliyah is like purposely destroying Dune and the sandworms, but it's not Aaliyah, it's possessed Aaliyah. And the Baron possessed, or the Aaliyah who's possessed by the Baron taunts her as she flees. Jessica ends up being able to finally make it out of there, and they're hiding out, but there's like a lot of fear of death. At that point, Duncan just like shows up and he's like, hey, I'm here to abduct you. We find out that the twins have like fled into the desert with Stilgar and with the rest of the crew. And so she decides like she's not going to fight it, and this Fremen who's like watching her is like, no, I'll go with him, it's fine. So she goes with Duncan voluntarily, and what he's going to do is he's going to take her to Seleucus Secundus to kind of train with Farad'n. Because that is what the preacher ordered him to do. And there's a bit of conversation about like the preacher showed up. He said something to Duncan. Duncan's like, holy shit, because it's like a command that only Paul Atreides would know, and it's a command that has to be followed. But like Aaliyah doesn't realize that. We then follow them over to Seleucus Secundus, where Farad'n is arguing with his mother. Again, he doesn't want to rule. He doesn't like this whole tiger thing, but he's like, all right, fuck it, whatever, it's gonna happen. So whatever happened to that tiger thing. So Leda and Ghanima fight and kill the tigers. Both are injured. Not too bad. Ghanima's injured more. And so they knew this was going to happen, and they planned for it, and they set up a plan for it. And essentially this is where they separate. And the idea was that whoever had the greatest capability to continue forward, like whoever's the least injured, was going to go down like the golden path, was going to take one path. And then the other twin was going to like they were going to like get them to like forget everything under like compulsion, except like using their Jedi mind tricks, and everything would come back given like a code phrase. Excuse me. So they implement their plan. Leto's going to go. He's going to head to Jakarut, or the secret mythical siege from like whatever. He's going to ride a sandworm out of there, and then Ghanima is going to like forget everything. She's going to think that Leto is dead. She's going to go back to Stilgar and report that he's dead. And then she's going to kind of do her thing, and that way if there's like a truce or anybody, they'll never be able to figure out what's going on, because she's under this like deep compulsion. We then head back to Slus Secundus. Ferrodin and his mother and Jecht are speaking to Duncan about the offer. The offer is Jessica. They talk about Paul. They talk about how he destroyed the Sardaukar and made them by making them soft, and how Ferrodin's been like slowly trying to get them back up, and that he's still going kind of through these motions. Back to Ganima. Ganima sneaks back into the siege. She misses her brother, of course. She thinks about that. She swears vengeance against House Carino because she knows that House Carino is the one who sent the tigers, and the Bene Gesserit know that they're ones who sent the tigers and killed Leto, and like there's going to be a lot of repercussions for House Carino. When she gets back to the siege, she sees like all the entrances are being covered by like fellow conspirators, and so she uses like some of her magic, like future sight and her like past sight, to like utilize like a blow dart to kill like these two, like this woman and this man. She kills like the man, and then goes and like captures the woman so that she can get in the siege and get to Stilgar and warn him so that he can like send people out and capture all these conspirators or kill them or whatever. Back over to Slus Secundus. Back and forth. Jessica and Duncan are being held prisoner by Ferrodin. And he is like, I don't like any of this shit. I don't like what's going on. So he starts interacting with them. And we find out that the word from Arrakis is that Ganima is being held by Aaliyah, that Leto's dead, that it's House Carino. That's response. Like, it is like, everyone knows, right? And then Jessica starts talking with Ferrodin about marrying Aaliyah to him. And then Duncan's getting like super mad about it, and so he like tries to kill himself. They stop that. And the whole reason is because he loves Aaliyah, and he's trying to like make a point about he's like he doesn't want to live, and he still doesn't accept the fact that she's a complete abomination. And then Jessica's like, maybe not Aaliyah, how about marrying Ganima, and then we can combine houses and solve all these problems, right? We go back in time a little bit. So Leto, as soon as Ganima and him separated, he summons a worm, right, like they were talking about. And he thinks about his sister, about everything he has to do, about this word that's going to awaken her, and about the golden path. So then he catches this worm and he rides it to Jakuta, the lost siege. He thinks about Stilgar. He has this memory, because it's like, what the fuck is this thing? I've never heard of this thing before. So he recalls like when they were younger, Stilgar was telling him about this story and that it awakened a memory. So he's really grateful to Stilgar because he said something, it like pulled out from these like ancestral memories. And it's like this cursed place. And it's this place that like did something so bad that it was like cursed, and all the water was taken away, and now it's like a place for outcasts. And it's like, this is the perfect place because the only people are going to be there are smugglers or outcasts, so they can't turn me back into Aaliyah or any of this stuff. And it's there that he's going to be able to implement his plan. And that he thinks to himself that like even Ganima doesn't know the whole thing about the plan. Like there's stuff that he held from her, and that she will hate him, that everyone will hate him at some point, but it is the golden path. It is what needs to be done to save humanity in the universe. And so at that point he sets up camp and goes to sleep. Back over to Slus Secundus. Ferrodin is watching Duncan, and he's trying to talk to Jessica. He's thinking about the Gola, thinking about why would a Mentat Gola try to kill himself, about the Atreides generally. And then it gets revealed that he has a super spice addiction, and that he covers his eyes with contacts so people don't realize it. He thinks more about building up the Sardaukar so they compete with the Fremen again, and he feels like I have Sardaukar that are an equal fight with the Fremen, because the Fremen have gotten weak and soft, but he does not have that many, so the Fremen would still destroy the Sardaukar if there was like a battle, but like it's only a matter of time. He starts thinking about Ganima and about his mother and how Jessica made it super easy to get rid of her, because essentially he was like, I need to get rid of my mom, she's a piece of shit, and she's doing all this stuff on my back, and she's just causing problems. But he's like, I don't know how I can get rid of her because she's like the princess regent or whatever. And then when Jessica showed up, essentially it was like, your mom did this, you got to get rid of her, because otherwise the Bene Gesserit are going to come to you because you're technically in charge. And he was like, you're banished, never come around here ever again, mom. And then she got banished. And like, I appreciate that, because it solved a lot of my problems. And then he goes back and thinks more about Duncan Idaho and his whole situation. Shooting back to Arrakeen, we get the preacher. He's coming to the temple. It's a holy day and a day of mourning for Leto. Everyone's wearing yellow, which is the traditional mourning garb for the Fremen. And Aaliyah is watching the preacher. She's hiding in the crowd, and he starts speaking. And Aaliyah's like, this is definitely Paul. This is my brother. I wonder what the fuck he's doing. Like, what's going on? And then the preacher talks about Leto as if he's alive. And then at some point he turns and looks directly at Aaliyah, and then talks directly to her, kind of giving her like some foresight. And then he calls her sister at some point, and then disappears in the crowd. And then at that point, all the voices inside her head are silent, and she is freaking the fuck out. We go back to Lucy Secundus for the meeting. So Duncan finally gets in with Jessica, and he's clearly putting on a show. And Jessica is like confused and then angry. She's like, "Why is he saying all this stuff? None of this makes sense." He's clearly trying to do something. And then Duncan says, "I am leaving House Atreides to join Ferrodin. I'm no longer a member of House Atreides. I'm a member of House Carino." And he's like, "In my heart, I left a long time ago, but now I'm making it official because you're like the member of House Atreides that's here." And he talks about joining with the preacher, and he condemns this new religion that's been going on, and then he wants to go back to like the old ways and whatnot. And then he leaves, and as he's leaving, he's very happy that he knows this whole thing was being recorded. So clearly he's putting on a show for Ferrodin, probably most likely to get Jessica kind of built in with him a little bit more, which is like his overall plan. Like Duncan does a lot of like sneaky stuff in this book. We had back over to Leto. He rode more worms and finally got to Jeruta or whatever. He just watches it. It seems completely abandoned, and he's like concerned. He's like, "I'm going to wait till night and then try to sneak up." So he does. He sees bats, and then he sees a fire. And because he sees a fire, he gets distracted and he falls into a trap. This concertina wire thingy or whatever like grabs him, and the more he moves, the tighter it gets. And he's like getting ready to like cut it loose by being very careful and losing his like past sight knowledge and whatnot. But then a man comes up, disarms him, grabs him from behind, and he's like, "Aha, we've been expecting you." And Leto's like, he's thinking, it's like, this is impossible. Only Ganima knew. And then the man starts talking about him being schooled, and that he has to learn how to like do stuff and not just have like these voices in the past, and he needs to actually learn how to be an emperor. Back over to Arakeen, Aaliyah is chewing out some guards. They need to capture the preacher, but do not kill them. You're doing a bad job. Make sure you do it this time. And then she dismisses them. And the Baron mentions, like, what are we going to do with Ganima? Like, she's an issue. Back over to Leto. He continues to get threatened with death. He gets questioned by this guy. It starts with an N. I can't remember exactly what it is. And they play this, like, little word game back and forth. And Leto's able to kind of figure out what he's going for so that he doesn't die right here. And so he passes the challenge. We head over to Lucy Secundus for Ferrodin, who's getting some Bene Gesserit training from Jessica. And he thinks to himself, like, this is so awesome. This is great. I can see why my mother didn't want me to get this training, because it would, like, I would never need her again, which is something he never really did anyway. And so it starts. And she gets him started on, like, these breathing techniques and some other stuff, and then she leaves him to it. And then as she's leaving, she's like, I hope Gurney and Duncan do play their parts well. Right, back over to Leto. He's sitting around waiting, and then guess who shows up? Dun, dun, dun. It's Gurney Howick. He's here with these guys. Like, what the fuck's going on? Oh, man. And then at some point, Leto's like, I knew my grandmother had her hands all over this bullshit. And at this juncture, they hold him down and inject him with spice, the thing that him and Ganima have been trying to do this whole time, because it drove Paul mad and drove Aaliyah into abomination and all this stuff. And then so his father and his, he's like going through all these like hallucinogens and like crazy stuff and like prescience and seeing all this stuff. And his father steps in to help. And then we get a scene from the Batlaharian Jihad with like the computers that were destroyed and that whole thing. And he gets like it's like a acid trip, right? He's like seeing past, future, and eventually he comes to, and Gurney's gone because Gurney didn't want to see him die in case he didn't pass. But he says something to the assassin guy about like, you can go ahead and kill me right now. I don't want to deal with this. And the guy's like, you passed. Like he didn't make too much of an emphasis or something on like this process or being like a future teller or anything. So it's like, that's why he didn't die. Back over to Arakeen. Ganima and Aaliyah are arguing about the betrothal of Ferrodin, and then Erdogan comes in to try to help out. Eventually, Ganima promises that if they make her marry Ferrodin, she's gonna kill him, which is like what Aaliyah secretly wanted this whole time, but double trick, double feint, right? It's actually Ganima who's tricking Aaliyah into thinking that Ganima is going to kill Ferrodin to bring Ferrodin here for like the final coup for like the whole thing that Ganima and Leto like set up to trick her. And so it's like plans upon plans upon plans, or feints upon feints upon feints, which is something that comes up quite often in these Dune series. Like these, like, oh, there's a trick. Oh wait, there's a trick on that trick. Oh wait, there's a trick on that trick on that trick. And this is like a scheme. This is part of like a grand scheme that Leto, Ganima, and Paul all put together. Back over to Leto, he's being kept on spice, and he's experiencing many things. And finally, he kind of comes to this like solution. He summons Gurney and the killer guy and tells them several things. And one of the things is that he wants to see Jessica, and they like cautiously agree that like, okay, yeah, that's fine. After they all leave, he considers that he has not lied to them about like the major content of things, but that he has not told them like everything that's going on, that he's still keeping a lot from these guys because he doesn't trust them. And then he thinks about order and diversity in the universe, and that diversity is important. Like order is important, but order can lead to like decay and death, while diversity keeps things strong and like helps people be able to react to different scenarios and whatnot. And he thinks about the thousands of years in the future when like things are going to change and they're going to need this like diversity and this strength. Later on at Salus Secundus, Faradin bursts into Jessica's room while she's just like sitting there, and he's like, "I've broken through in my training," and he's like, "I realized that the mind creates reality." And then she's like, "Oh, congratulations, you've finally begun. You've finally been born again. You finally started on your journey." And it's what I've been training like this for like all this time. And she says a whole bunch of cryptic shit to him about him being like a baby and like he's made the first step, so like he's like human and not an animal essentially. But now like the real training begins. And then Faradin's like, she's definitely involved in some sort of like strange conspiracy, but I don't know what it is. Then he's like, all right, I'll keep training, and heads out. Back over in with Leto, he's in the desert and he's sitting on like a carpet in the desert, and he's having a spice trance. He reconciles everything, all the multiple lives, the past, the future, the present. He spends like a whole day here. Like Gurney and the assassin guy are like watching him, and then they leave the assassin guy's daughter to like watch over him. So when he awakens, there's the girls, Sabia. And he has like, now that he has like this prescience, it's kind of like Paul in Dune Messiah, where he's like, there's a timeline where we make love and she's my wife, and she's sitting there ready to kill him in case anything crazy happens. And so he starts just like dumping like a whole lot of cryptic shit to her about their marriage, about them having sex, about the loss of worms, the end of empire. And then he switches, and she's like freaking out, and he's like, there's ways to fix it. A friend must die, and are you willing to let a friend die, which is like killing a friend? And then the other thing is to give my sister to a monster. Back over to Ganima and Erdogan are speaking to each other. They're talking about the marriage to Faradin. And this is where I realized, like, oh, okay, I misunderstood. I thought Faradin was like a nephew of Erdogan, but he's the cousin. So he's the nephew of the emperor, not the grandson. My bad. Anyway, and they're back at the siege with Stilgar. They left Erkin and they're hanging out here. And then Ganima keeps trying to help Erdogan understand, and this is the part where it's like we see like they have a really good relationship, and Ganima just really wants Erdogan, who's like essentially her mom, to like understand and to help her, but Erdogan is just so dumb. She's like having a real hard time with it, and Ganima's like really struggling with the abomination thing as well. Because, and this is where it gets brought up like very specifically, that women have it harder in Fremen's, like, you know, in Fremen society and whatnot as well. Like this is like a commonly known thing with like the past lives, is like it's much harder for these women generally to keep all this like craziness going. And then we find out that like how it works is there will be past lives that are very helpful, and they kind of exist, and they'll give information and do things. But then there's the bad side, all the bad malignant forces, and at some point the malignant forces start combining together to like override the ego, and that's what turns in it one of these people like Ganima, Leto, or Aaliyah into an abomination, is once the malignant force takes control. And so at that point, Erdogan like pulls Ganima into her arms, because again she's like the daughter she never had, and she's like holding her and rocking her, and then Ganima at that point is like, I pray that I won't have to kill you. I won't have to, not to Erdogan, but she's thinking it. She's like, I pray you don't have to die, because she doesn't say it, but it's implied that she also has love for Erdogan and everything she's done for her, and that, you know, it's nice to have this like calm presence in your existence, which is why it's good to have mothers who aren't crazy. Okay. So then back over at Siege Jakuta or whatever, Leto is getting ready for his escape, and he's figured out everything, what Jessica and Gurney want, and then he has a moment where he has an embarrassment of a future. You know, he gets embarrassed because he's thinking about banging out Sabia and like a future they have together, because she's hanging out there with him, and eventually he's like, come here, and she comes over and he like hypnotizes her to fall asleep, and then he just gets up and he like walks the fuck out of there. And a little bit later, Gurney and Namia, oh yeah, that's the assassin guy, Namia, find her, and they're like, fuck, and they're like, we gotta go get him right now. And then Namia's like, we're not gonna go get him, he's headed off into the desert, it could be anywhere, and there's a sandstorm coming, so not even like, there's no communications, the satellites already dropped out, and honestly he's probably dead. Duncan has finally returned to Arakeen, and he's meeting with Aaliyah, giving her the report from Seleucus Secundus, and he's extremely sad at this point because Aaliyah is completely gone. She's completely possessed. She is an abomination at this juncture. She questions his loyalty, and she thinks about she wants him dead. And Duncan is like, cool. And she's like, I'm going to send you back to Siege Tabor to watch over Ganima, and I'm going to have this person take you. And he's like, what about taking an ornithopter? And she's like, no, you're just going to take like a caravan. And Duncan's like, oh, she definitely wants me to die. And so he's like, okay, sounds good. And so he runs out, like, goes past somebody. He's like, oh, you're supposed to go this way. And he's like, I'm taking an ornithopter, and then someone will bring it back. And he's like, because he's like the husband of Aaliyah, they just kind of like, okay, I guess. And so he gets in the ornithopter and he like cries it out real hard because like the love of his life is gone and there's nothing he can do about it. And at that point he heads over to Siege Tabor. And we've also find out that the whole kingdom of like the Atreides is like under attack from rebels, and that things are getting bad across the board. So back to Leto. One of his plans here to get to the Golden Path is he's cutting out every possible future. He's cutting all the cords so that there's no other futures to interfere, to cause confusion, to cause problems. He sees the storm and he's like, this is excellent. So he summons a worm, and he's going to use this worm to like ride into the storm and to protect himself from the storm somewhat, and then that's gonna eliminate the chance for like Gurney or anybody to follow him, and he's like, if I go this way, there's a future there's a future here. If I go into the storm, no future. That's where I'm going. Let's do this. So he ends up riding the sandworm into the storm, and then he like slides into like his still tent into the desert while the storm's like going, and he's able to like hide out in there. And he's like, well, I could be dead, but we'll see, because the storm can move like tons and tons of sand on top of him, and there's no way for him to be able to get out. But he's going to chance it, and at this point he can't see if there's a future at all. So he's like, let's fucking go. This is the only chance we have. And so then he puts himself in like a torpor state because there's like no oxygen, because he can't get it. Like they have these like snorkels. They have these snorkels that you put out of the tent because they go under the sand, and then they allow you to like breathe, get oxygen in and out of the tent, because he can't put that up because of the storm and the moving of the sand. He just gets in the tent, gets under the sand, and puts himself in like a torpor state using like Bene Gesserit magic. So he only needs to breathe like once an hour. And this is again all part of the plan to cut all ties to the Golden Path. Heading back over to Seleucus Secundus, we see Jessica finishing like some training with Ferrodin, and she makes a comment about like he is no longer House Carino, he is now a Bene Gesserit. And then we head back to Leto. It's a quick like intermission, and he's able to get out of the thing, the tent, without any issues. He wasn't buried in that much sand, but his suit got all cut up, so he lost like half his water. At that point, he catches a worm and heads further into the wildlands. And then he continues to plan. The Fremen must become hardy again. They must keep to the desert. The desert's life. Without this, humanity will fail. He sees some smugglers up ahead. These smugglers are cast out Fremen that live on like the outskirts in these like wildlands where there's like no greenery, and there's water is rare, and it's like outcasts of the outcasts. One of them, two of these guys ride an ornithopter out to where Leto is, and you find out that this guy's the leader, and that Leto's like, these guys are definitely going to kill us. But they go back and forth like some Fremen word games and logic, and eventually Leto's able to turn this whole thing around by promising he'll make the people strong again, going back to the old ways. And they talk about Shulak, which is another myth, just like Jakrut. And eventually Leto's able to convince this gentleman, who's like the head judge of like the Judge of the Dead or whatever, to allow Leto to become an outcast and to join up with them. So they head over to Shulak, and we get some more information about the sand trouts, how they love water, how they like capture these. The whole point of these guys is that they're the ones who are capturing the sand trouts and the worms, and then shipping them off planet. And then Leto makes a comment about how like none of them are going to survive, and he's like, well, some of them might survive, and he's like, no, none will ever survive. They're tied to Arrakis very specifically because Arrakis is special, and there's like things in Arrakis that are treasures that people don't even realize are there. Then this is the only place these worms can exist, and the only place the spice can be grown. And then he realizes that this is the siege where Paul went when he was outcast. When he vanished out into the desert, right, blind, this is where he ended up, and that he's under some sort of control with these guys, right? And then he also notices that Sabia's here because she got cast out because she let him go. So that's like, hey, you failed, get the fuck out of here. And then at this point, Leto brings up like, I'm trying to remember what it was called. It's like Talasac or Tempest Sac, or it's the end of the world, right? It's the end of the universe. There's like this mythology in Fremen where it's like Ragnarok essentially. Like this is the final battle, the end of the universe, and that Leto, he's talking about this with this guy. It's like Maurice or Moros, and how Leto's going to protect them all for it. At that point, he calls out to Sabia, and she sees him and runs away. And then the Moros guy is like, she's not going to make it far. No one's going to take her. And Leto lets him know that she's the daughter of the Namia guy. And Moros is like, damn, really? Why'd he cast out his own daughter? And Leto's like, because she let me go. Or she lost me, so she got cast out. They then go and confront Sabia. Leto then talks to him about how, and he's looking at the desert and looking at this, and he's like, thus it all begins here. And then he starts to cry. Back over at Siege Jakut, Gurney is super frustrated with Numia. Because Numia's like, oh, Leto's safe, but we can't go there. Gurney's like, what about Jessica? And then finally Numia reveals that all these messages that Gurney supposedly was getting from Jessica are actually coming from Aaliyah, that Leah is in control of this whole situation because Jessica has been captured. And that it's actually Alita who wanted Leto under the spice. And so at that point they fight, like they physically fight, knife fight, and Gurney quickly wins and stabs the guy in the face. And then he's like, all right, best way not to get caught, look like you belong. He like rolls the guy's body into like a corner and puts like a rock in front of him. And then he like puts up his stuff and he just like wanders out of there like there's no problem whatsoever. Not too fast, not too slow. And then finally we get to chapter 52, which is where fucking the game really gets afoot. So get ready for it. Leto is sitting with Sabia. No still suit. They took it away so he can't escape, right? Moros is much more crafty than Numia. But he's like, I'm going to go for a walk. And Sabia's like, you will die out there. And he's like, I'll be fine. And so he finds some sand trout and he starts merging with them, which is, he talks about how it's a game where like Fremen children will grab like a sand trout and put it on their arm and it'll kind of like start to like suck the water from their skin and then they like get rid of it. It'll like suck some like green juice from it. It's like, okay. But he's like, he starts merging with the sand trout and then he's doing like this combination of threads and all this stuff. And he's like putting the sand trout over his naked body. And he's like, takes off all his clothes and stuff. Anytime the sand trout tries to like merge with like his mouth or his face, he's like, nope, absolutely not. And so he's using like all his knowledge and all his Bene Gesserit training and all his like lifetimes of things to essentially make the sand trout become a part of him, so that essentially it gives him like superpowers. And he keeps doing it till he becomes like not human. And then at some point the Fremen, after some time, he's like merged. He's like super fast, super strong. He's like doesn't need water anymore because the sand trout like produce or like capture all the water moisture within him and like reproduce it. It's like he's literally has become non-human. He still has a human form, but he essentially has like a permanent still suit on that gives him like, makes him super strong and super fast and able to like resist sand and like swim through the sand like a fucking sandworm and all this stuff. And so when the Siege finally realizes he's not there, they come out to grab him, and he uses all these like new sandworm powers to escape and hide. And then he thinks about how he's like, I need to destroy the transformation of this planet into a livable planet so that I can give myself time, give myself some generations to implement like the plans that are going to like save the universe and start something new. And he's like, all right, I need to go start causing trouble, and then I'm going to rescue Ganima. And so a little bit later we join Aaliyah, and she has a headache. The rebel things are getting worse. A lot of her like areas that are like capturing water or using water to transform the planet are getting destroyed. No one knows what's happening. She gets these like crazy fucking reports where there's just like a single child like doing all this stuff, or it's like one individual and all this stuff. The rebels are really starting to amp up like just their problems within Arakeen and stuff. And some of the she gets word that sand trouts are attacking water holes and sucking up all the water and destroying that. And the Baron keeps telling her she wants to fuck. She's like, no. And it seems like she's pregnant because at some point it mentions that her belly is larger than normal. But that's like the only mention of the whole thing. So I don't know if that's actually a thing. But she's been fucking a bunch of dudes, obviously, because that's what the Baron wants. And so back to Leto. He's sitting on the desert and he's watching the preacher and his like guide ride up on a sandworm, and Leto goes out and the guide is going to just like ram the fuck out of the kid that he sees and kill him, and then Leto's like stop, and the worm stops. And that's one of the superpowers, is now the worms don't recognize him as like a threat. They recognize him as like part of their community, or as like water essentially. So they will not attack. They will stop. And so he stops the sandworm, and then the preacher and the assistant get off. At that point, the preacher comes off, and Leto's like, "You are my father. You are Paul." And he's like, "I am not Paul. I am the preacher." He's like, "Shut the fuck up." And they start talking about that, and he's like, "All right, I am Paul." But Paul has lost his soul a long time ago, and I was tempted with spice and like women and all this stuff. So he's just been hanging out here, and so this is the preacher is Paul, but he doesn't go as Paul anymore because he's lost his mind and lost his way, and it's just kind of like a shell of like what he used to be. The guide at that point is like he tries to use this like crazy shield thing because remember the shield's like bring the worms. It's like an artificial shield reactor that's gonna like drive a worm mad. He tries to use that, but then Leto's like, I don't think so, and he uses it against the guy. He like bounces it back to the guy, or he kills him, grabs his neck and like snaps it before he can use his thing. And then they sit down and talk. And they talk about the golden path. And Paul is like, I know about the golden path, but I was too much of a coward to go down it. I couldn't do it. And he's like, I wish to die in the desert. So, but instead I came here and I got captured and they corrupted me and did all this stuff. So then they have a long discussion about the Fremen, about life, about their decisions, what brought them here, and then about the typhoon or whatever, the end of the world, the war of the last worlds. And essentially Paul is like, just let people live and enjoy life, and then when it comes, it'll be the end of the universe. And then Leto's like, I'm not going to make the same mistake as you. Your jihad will be nothing compared to the death and destruction I will reap across the universe. But we will survive. Like, we will survive the end times. And he's like, the problem with you, Father, is that you were not Fremen. As much as you like came in and did stuff, you were not Fremen. I was born and raised Fremen, and as a Fremen, I understand like the consequences and like the absolutes of like this person. Like, if a child needs to die because it's better for the siege, it needs to die. So that is how this is going to go. And then they talk about how the Bene Gesserit have already suspected that something like this needs to happen, and that is kind of what has driven Jessica here to cause some of these things and to be involved. Eventually it starts getting late in the day, and so they go into a tent together, and then Paul once again mentions that he calls him like Paul or his father, and he's like, Paul is dead, all that remains now is the preacher. Over at Siege Tabor, Duncan is meeting with Stilgar about everything that's happened. This is supposed to be like a neutral ground where Gahima is safe, but Duncan is agitating Stilgar and agitates, and eventually one of this priest, the new one that Aaliyah's fucking around with, shows up, and then Duncan turns around and fucking kills him, despite Stilgar saying if he does it, he's going to kill him. And so Stilgar leaps across the room to kill Duncan, and as he's stabbing him, Duncan gives him like a wry smile, and Stilgar realizes that this is exactly what Duncan wanted, because this means that Aaliyah's going to have to seek vengeance against Stilgar for killing her husband, even though that's maybe what she wanted. And so he announces to like his siege that I'm leaving. Everyone's coming with me that wants. And then Hera's like, I'm coming. And he's like, woman, of course you're coming. You're my wife. All my wives are coming. And Ghanima and Erdogan are also coming. They have no choice. So Leah finds out about Duncan and Stilgar, and she's like, God damn it. And so she sends some guys to go kill Stilgar. And then she wants to have sex with this guy first. And then on some level, she like cries for the loss of Duncan, and she's like, I don't understand why I'm crying. Like, what is this emotion? Because again, she's an abomination. This kind of like certifies that like everything she was in the previous book, and maybe even the beginning of this, is like gone. She is a totally different creature at this point. Some time goes by, and we find out that Ghanima has been traveling with Stilgar for some time. They're doing all right. They sent all like the women and children and old men to like sea edges that they could trust that were like hidden away. Stilgar seems like he's living his best life. He's back in the desert. He's traveling. He's doing desert shit. And Ghanima feels strangely at peace as well. The voices have all quieted. She feels way more in control. At some point, they get into an argument with Hera about a prisoner, and then she gets like shunted off because she's just a child, which makes her super mad. She's like, fuck you guys, I'm way older than all of you. Leto and Paul track down Gurney, and they start having a conversation with them. And Paul reiterates that he's not Paul anymore, he's the preacher, and that he's not the Duke, he's not in charge of shit or whatever. And that at this juncture, Leto has caused a complete submission of all the outcasts. Like, they will do whatever the fuck he says. Like, he's like, put them in their place. And then Gurney's like, I want you to come back, Paul. I want to serve you again. And Paul's like, I cannot. And they start talking about what Jessica's been up to, and it's just some old Bene Gesserit bullshit. And then Leto makes a threat about tearing everything down and about going back. Stilgar is having a council with the guy that Aaliyah sent out, and Ghanima's like, I'm not going fucking back. And Stilgar's like, I love it. And so they're having this kind of like council and this argument, but then Aaliyah gets like grabbed from behind and kind of knocked out with some drugs and kidnapped and taken away. Back over to Leto and Paul, they're talking about a about returning to Arakim, what they're going to do. Leto's like, I need you to come preach. But I warn you that if you come with me and do this, you will not return to the desert. And Paul's like, I will no longer like shunt myself away from my duties. I will go. I will do this final act. And then Leto's like, hey, Gurney, I want you to stay here because I want you to live. I don't want you to die. And it's like, Ganima's there. And then they depart. And then we kind of wrap up with the last couple of chapters. So back at Arakim, Aaliyah's watching dancers dance, like these kind of Talaxu dancers and whatnot. And then the preacher shows up and she thinks about everything, her plans. She's like, oh, the plans are coming along nicely. Stilgar killed that guy, but then he got captured. So he's here, and Ganima's here, and Ergolon's here. And then my mother and Faradon are coming here, and I'm going to get Ganima to marry Faradon, but then Ganima's going to kill Faradon. And in the chaos, I'll take everything over. And hopefully Jessica will get killed as well. And she's like, tee hee 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 hee. I'll be in charge and I'll rule, and no one will be able to do anything about it. At that point, Faradon requests that he can come watch the preacher in her box, and she's like, oh, fine. She schemes some more. She's like, yo, you don't bring Ganima here. Let's just kill this guy right now and be done with this bullshit. And then once they're all together, getting up there, not Ganima, but like Faradon and Jessica and stuff, the preacher shouts, and he accuses Aaliyah, and then people go like mad, the preacher's killed, and then Jessica and Faradon are there to witness all of this, and Aaliyah then orders Ganima to be brought to them. And right at that point, the door gets like smashed in, and not just like the door swings open really fast. Like it comes like off the hinges, flies into a wall, kills some dudes. Aaliyah's like, and there's Leto and Ganima, and she's like, stop them. And then Leto like picks up the door and like fucking swings at some more guys and kills them. And he's like, go fuck yourself. It's not going to happen. And then Aaliyah states that the preacher was Paul, and later, at that point, Ganima's kind of like, what the fuck's happening? And then Leto uses the phrase that him and Ganima came up with, and she remembers everything. And then Leto, in front of all these people, calls out Aaliyah, and then at that point, Aaliyah like completely loses it. She's going from like past self to past self to past self, like different people are speaking. She's like gone abomination. She's cycling through all these things. She goes to try to stop Leto, but then he just like fucking stops her like in her tracks. And then Ganima and Leto tell her they can help her or they can kill her. It's up to her. And then finally she just like freaks out. She gains a little bit of control, starts crying like her childhood self, and then just throws herself off the balcony to her death. And at that point, Jessica starts crying because now she's lost both her children in like one afternoon. Like, good damn. Goodness gracious. After that, some time goes by, and Leto begins like his rule essentially, and things are starting to calm down. Ganima is standing around with Faradon, and she's like, we're gonna mate. To help Leto out. And Faradon's like, okay, I guess. She's like, reveals some more information about their plan. She says Leto's going to completely metamorphize into something different. Like, he's no longer human now, but he's like, he still looks human. And in the next like 3,000 to 4,000 years, that's no longer going to be around. And we are going to have complete control of the spice, and not just like a little bit of the spice. Like, there'll be no spice. The chom's done. Everything's done. Like, the spice will be 100% controlled by Leto and them, House Atreides. And that there's already all this trouble in the Empire. There's already like people fighting and all these rebellions and stuff. And she's like, it's going to get worse. But the Bene Gesserit are on board. Like, they're going to do what fucking Leto tells them to do. And so there's nothing anybody can do about it at this point. And then we go to like the final chapter. I think this is the final chapter. Where Leto is like officially, he's sitting on his throne and he's ruling and he's got his council. And then he has his father's water in a jar. And Stilgar's there, and he's speaking to him. And he's like, you're going to return to Siege Tabor. Gurney's going to come with you. Stilgar's like, oh, so you don't trust me? It's like, it's not about trusting you. But Gurney is that representative. Like, you are no longer under House Atreides. Gurney is. So Gurney's going to go. He's going to train with you. He's going to make sure the fucking Fremen get back to where they need to be. And then he turns to Faradon, who's now considered a scribe. And he's like, hey, man, you're going to give me all your Sardaukar. And Faradon's like, no, I'm not. And he's like, you will. And this is why. Me and Ganima are going to get married. Because that is what I am, like the Bene Gesserit mating program is over. It is my mating program at this point. But as you can clearly see, I cannot have children. So you're going to do it. And those children will be mine and Ganima's because we will be married. And you will essentially be what Chani was to Paul. You will be the concubine who will have the children. But they will be mine. And that they will rule under me for like generations to generations. Then he starts talking some shit about the Bene Gesserits, and then the talks end. And then he talks about the end of the universe. He talks about there's a lot Dune hold, and this is where he's like, Dune holds a lot more secrets than you think, a lot more treasures than people have anything about. And then Faradon's like, I don't know about all this, and Ganima like takes his hand, and he's like, she's hot. And he's like, fine, I relent. You can have the Sardaukar, and I can bang your sister. he's like, good, no one will find out about it. It'll just be us, and we'll know about it. You'll be a breeder, but you can go back to doing what you love, which is being a historian and a scribe and focusing on that. And then you have the love of Ganima, because they both like each other, actually, even though they just barely met, because they're both like beautiful people, young, and they're both intelligent and crafty and stuff. And Leto's like, you can do whatever you want. I just need the seed. And then Faradin's like, are you an abomination at this point? And he's like, I am and I am not. I am nothing that people would consider anything human, which could make me an abomination, but I am not like what Aaliyah was. And all the malignant forces are gone, but I am not actually Leto at this point. Like, I'm a combination of like dominant forces. And he references this god emperor that ruled for like 3,000 years back in like America, and like the human history and like way long ago, and how that is the dominant personality, and that he needed that personality to be dominant because this person has ruled for thousands of years, and now he knows how to rule for thousands of years, and he's going to make this fucking shit happen, and it's going to be great. And it's also going to be terrible for a lot of people. And that Leto is still, the personality of the ego of Leto is still there, along with Paul, along with Leto the First and all this stuff, but he is no longer the front-facing present person. But they're all these like positive forces. Instead of being an abomination like Aaliyah, where she has lost control, this control is very tight, and all the system, all the past lives are working together in concert to help this thing be successful and to overcome the darkness. And then Paul kind of like, and not Paul, then Leto's like, all right, good day. Or it also gets brought up that so Aaliyah failed to abomination, but that Leto and Ganima found another way. They accepted the past lives, and they were able to overcome it. Ganima with the help of her mother and like the acceptance and like meditation, and Leto by like fully embracing and bringing forth powerful personalities that were righteous and that fit into the goals and all this stuff, and to essentially transform himself into a sandworm eventually. So they both remain themselves. Then as Leto heads off, and then Ganima tells Faradin, it could have been either one of us. Like the way we predicted it, and the way we kind of saw it going forward was like whoever was the stronger. But it's good that it was Leto who survived the tigers, because he is much stronger than I. And that is the end of the book. Fucking baller as shit. Yeah, so great. Children of Dune was excellent. And then next week we'll get to God Emperor Dune, which is the 4th book in the series. So go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys later.